All right, I guess it's time. So, hello, I'm Ryan Mahoney. I'm one of the co-founders of the nonprofit organization TransitOps. TransitOps focuses on the many ways that open source software can improve the experience of public transit for riders and ultimately advance the goal of equity. Today, I'm going to be talking about the mobility data interoperability principles, which is a little hard to say. I may refer to it sometimes as MDIP. Disclaimer, I'm not the official spokesperson for MDIP, but I am a co-author and a signatory. So honestly, today, what I would have loved to talk about is, why don't people who run transit agencies, ride public transit, or, bus shortages, or even the trials and tribulations of real-time passenger counting. But instead, I got stuck with interoperability. Just kidding, just kidding. I love interoperability, and hopefully you'll feel the same warm, fuzzy feelings about it during this talk. But also, maybe you'll feel some anger too against the tyranny of the utterly unnecessary non-interoperability that plagues our industry, which is something that in my work, I have kind of a front row seat at, as I see how technology obstacles frequently obstruct the MBTA and other agencies from providing really useful information to riders about the system itself, disruptions, predictions, and so much else. Finally, hope. Hopefully we can unite demanding industry-wide changes through MDIP as a vehicle for change. So let's take this one step at a time. If you are like me, a person who is responsible for 1, 2, or even 37 transit data systems, then in this case, when the topic of interoperability comes up, you immediately think of one thing: the Spice Girls. The Spice Girls and their prophetic 1996 pop anthem, Wannabe, where they foretold almost verbatim the situation we would find ourselves in today. And I misquote: "If you want to be my transit vendor, you got to get with my transit data systems. Vendor lock-in won't last forever. Contracts sometimes end." Right? What a song, right? This is a 25-year anniversary, by the way. Sorry. I'll be serious. Let me tell you what I want. What I really, really want is for transit data systems to work together. That's what interoperability is. Interoperability means that two systems can talk to each other, usually according to some predefined approach or protocol. I know this definition has the word systems in it, which sounds pretty vague. I think it's sort of the best term available. So I'm going to give an example that much of us experience in our day-to-day lives. Does anybody here use Gmail as their email system? I bet many of you do. I'll confess, I see a raised hand. There you go. I still use AOL for email. It's okay. These different email systems use a protocol based on an open standard called SMTP, the Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, which makes it possible for me to send messages to anybody. So even though, Gmail was built by Google, probably in Java while people were waiting for their stocks to vest, and AOL system was written in COBOL or whatever, while those people's parents were worried about Y2K, email works across companies, generations, technologies. Email systems interoperate. I never have to buy expensive software, also called middleware, to convert my email messages from AOL protocol into a similar but different Gmail protocol. See, SMTP is so ubiquitous, people almost never think about it. Email just works no matter what system you subscribe to. I may not ever leave AOL email, but other people have. They can do so by conducting essentially a personal open procurement, evaluating available email services based on their merits. You don't have to stick with AOL because the cost of switching is so expensive that it outweighs the benefits of a more modern system. So email's great. It almost seems like a human right in a way, but it wasn't always like this. In the early days of the internet, people formed working groups to establish that the standards that we rely on and honestly take for granted. As I mentioned earlier, I'm here representing MDIP, a similar working group promoting open standards in public transit. And we'll kind of get into that in a bit. So let's look at interoperability in terms of kind of how it comes into public transit. I think that people outside of public transit tend to look at public transit and any technology challenges that we might have as they must be fixed. Public transit's old, right? But if you work in this industry, you know that it is really, really complex. This is a list I put together like off the top of my head. So we think about There's a route and it's got stops according to a shape or a route pattern. Trips are occurring. Vehicles are on these trips have some adherence to a schedule or a headway. Maybe a vehicle's running regular service. Maybe it's a variant of that. Where is it? How long until it arrives at the next stop? When we indicated 3 minutes ago that it was going to arrive, were we accurate? How accurate are we on average? How long do people wait? Is the vehicle crowded? Can you socially distance? Which operator is driving the vehicle? How was this operator even selected? This is part 2 of 50 slides. It's going to take a while. I'm just kidding. But there's a lot of topics that are really important in transit agencies around this data. And there's so much data, so many concerns. They affect so many people. And the current state is that these systems tend to exist independently. So there's a system for alerts and a system for predictions and a system for fares, totally different systems provided by different vendors that use different technologies and they speak different protocols. As an agency, you kind of have 3 options when you deal with a lack of interoperability. 1, do nothing. Live with the limitations, suck it up. Certainly the the low cost option, if you will. Maybe your alert system doesn't talk to your trip planner. Maybe it's the same vendor provides your alert system and your website, so it's good there. But people who use your trip planner aren't going to know when the journey that they may embark on isn't going to quite work. This could be problematic for anybody, but if someone's using assistive technology like a wheelchair, not getting an alert about the only elevator that connects you from one mode to another could be hours of wasted time for this person. Manual workarounds. Sometimes you have 2 systems that don't talk to each other, but using people, you can rekey the data from like your scheduling system into your AVL system or something like that. It's certainly nobody's dream job, but it's something you can do. There's a lot of risks here. There's a lot of human error in doing this if you're rekeying it instead of it just sort of flowing from one system to the next. There's even human error when you're validating the data, because that's also tends to be a manual process. And when that doesn't work out, changes go into production, and they could be really stressful and complex to fix after they've been sort of transmitted out there. The last one that I'll highlight is middleware. And I'll confess, up until this presentation, when I really started to think about it, this was kind of my poison, I guess you could say. I thought it was a really clever idea, but eventually the weight of this option kind of catches up to you. So basically, you can simulate interoperability by building new systems that sit between your existing systems to take in data in one format and translate it into another format. And I mean, it seems so clever. Obviously, this option isn't really available to all agencies all the time because it's kind of expensive to build these systems. You have to have certain skill sets on staff. But eventually, this middleware approach becomes a pretty big burden because you might have started out with 20 systems, but now you've got 30. And all these systems need to get secured, updated, monitored. If there's an issue and data stops flowing for whatever reason, it's sometimes hard to know, well, was it one of our sort of key original proprietary vendor systems, or is it one of these middleware systems that's failing? So things just get confusing. And at the end of the day, when you have staff that are just here to support these applications, you're diverting funds away from maybe more urgent rider concerns just to compensate for this lack of interoperability. Must seem like I'm pretty negative in this talk today because, a lack of interoperability is pretty awful, but there's, I think, a lot of success cases as well. The obvious one, I think, in the industry is the General Transit Feed Specification, GTFS, and its subsequent real-time extensions. This is an open standard that started gaining momentum about 15 years ago. It's been embraced pretty extensively throughout the industry, although there's plenty of room for improvement on that. Before I kind of go like deeper into a specific GTFS success story, I think it's also worth highlighting that although GTFS is a mature, it's an open standard, it's somewhat widely adopted, it doesn't cover all the data concerns of an agency. It covers a very significant subset, especially things that are really important to riders, but there's other data that is not a part of GTFS. I don't know if it belongs in GTFS. Maybe it'll get added through some type of extension, but I think more likely there needs to be additional open standards for data or more detailed views of data. That being said, this is a picture I kind of slapped together last night that is an example of something that we have in the MBTA in Massachusetts. So in this case, on the left, we have an alerts, what I'm calling a CMS, basically a system that people at the MBTA can use to create a service alert. This happens to be, in the MBTA's case, a piece of software that was provided by a vendor. It's proprietary, it's not open source, but it does adhere to open standards. So this tool publishes a GTFS feed, and then that feed gets picked up by all these different systems. So for example, in the MBTA, they use the Open Trip Planner, an open source application that adheres to the same standard. It gets picked up by their API, which is also open source. It gets consumed by the MBTA's website, which was built in-house. It even gets picked up by some prediction generation systems, which can adjust predictions. So if there's an alert that says that a stop is closed, they don't really need to generate predictions for that stop. I'm sure there's other cases as well. So that data will get kind of pumped back into a pool of GTFS feeds that then go out again through the API to the website, but also to external apps such as Transit app, which I have featured here, which presents these service alerts in a really attractive way to the riders of the MBTA. The nice thing in this case is that the data just sort of flows. Even though this seems like a lot of systems, these are the systems that you need. These are the necessary ones. If there wasn't a standard, there'd be a lot of little circles in between all these circles to translate between these systems. I also think it's great that, although the experience of reading an alert on the website or on a screen near a station or in whatever, Google Maps or Transit is a little different, essentially everybody's getting more or less the same information, which is great to know as an agency that there's this type of consistency across all these different platforms. So we know that interoperability can work in public transit. And when you think about it, interoperability is not a big lift for software providers and vendors. After all, interoperability, which is hard to say, is what computer systems are designed to achieve. Many of the great open source software applications in public transit, such as the transit clock and some of the API work and different work at the T, or sometimes even work that's maintained by volunteers, achieves interoperability because adhering to existing standards is actually more straightforward in many cases than creating a similar but different format for interchanging data. So why then? In this industry that has so much data, so many systems, why is interoperability as rare as it is? Well, transit agencies depend on vendors to make their systems interoperable. And vendors aren't always motivated to achieve or advance open standards. In addition, and I myself work in public transit, and I love and support people who work in public transit. I think that in many cases, the people who deal with vendors, they wear many hats, right? It's hard working in this industry. So it's possible that, when you're participating in an RFP or something like that, you have to be the expert in public transit, subject matter. You have to be now an expert in technology and open standards and APIs and all this. And you're almost like a lawyer because you're reviewing contracts and things like that. So it's not surprising that this topic can get overlooked, or even maybe framed as kind of a request instead of a demand. And I think that really gets us back to MDIP, the organization. Go to the website, check it out. Through this work, you can learn about, holding vendors accountable and what to ask for. But it's not just information that you consume. It's really a coalition, right? So this group is working together to determine to advance the usage of existing standards, but also to create new standards. You can check it out. You can become a part of it. Everybody is welcome. You should get involved. I'm almost done. Basically, if you're someone who works in an agency, when you write your next RFP, think about it. Say no to vendor lock-in. Say no to unnecessary and expensive complexity, and demand interoperability. Vendors that won't interoperate, they don't need to apply. When you're evaluating the vendor's claims, run tests. Check if the products or services achieve your interoperability goals. If you're a vendor who does achieve these goals, let people know. We care. We see you. We celebrate you. We probably are interested in you participating in a fair procurement process. But if you're a vendor and you're not there yet, get there. The future of public transit is interoperable. Siobhan, one of my co-partners in Transit Ops who reviewed this deck, was like, yeah, no CAD AVL contract that doesn't provide GTFS real-time should ever be signed. If you're unsure about this stuff, use MDIP as a resource. And that's what I got. So